Hello and welcome to this online event, which is Save Your Summer Holiday, and how true those words are ringing at the moment. My name's Claire Irvin. I'm Head of Travel at The Telegraph. Some of you may have joined us earlier in the year for our How to Travel in 2021 event series, where we looked at city breaks, family holidays, cruises, and the ongoing changes to travel restrictions. Obviously, at that point, we were in full lockdown in the UK, and so we were really trying hard to provide some optimism and inspiration for what was to come later in the year. If only we'd known. So 3 months later, here we are, and we had anticipated coming back to you with some more certainty, some directives and maybe even some optimism. But with the summer holidays on the horizon, even with a 4-week delay, there is just still huge amounts of confusion. And I hope that what is within our powers to do, we will help clear up some of that confusion tonight, and we will attempt to cover everything from greenlist countries to travel insurance and pre-flight COVID-19 tests. So without further ado, let me introduce my two Telegraph colleagues that I'm very lucky and you're very lucky are joining, who want to be left with me all evening. So we have Ben Ross, who's Deputy Head of Travel.
Hello.
Ben. And Chief Consumer and Culture Editor Nick Trend.
Hello.
How on earth are we going to navigate this summer? Just before we came on air, we were all ranting about the latest developments today. So, we kind of, I guess, just need to try and work out when some kind of normality will resume. And Nick and Ben, strategies for saving your summer holiday, strategies for booking, where to go. Is the UK already booked up? What's your individual strategies, Ben? What's your strategy for this summer?
Hello everybody. This is obviously an extremely confusing and difficult summer for everyone. I think from a personal point of view, I'm a father of a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old son, and it puts families with teenagers, I think, in an enormously difficult situation with the news from Portugal and Malta today, which is basically removing the entire echelon of traveller from the ability to move between countries, because they're saying that basically those between the ages of 12 and 17 aren't allowed to travel. Now, obviously, that affects me in that I have a 19-year-old who has just been jabbed and will have 3 months before he gets the next one. And by the time he gets the next one, the younger one will be back at school. So the idea of a family holiday is getting extremely difficult from my point of view. And I think family holidays are the things that really we're getting at the peak, the apex of difficulty just this summer, just because there is a real deadline with a family holiday. It's to do with school holidays and when people can travel. And as a result, we're all very, very focused in on this period from the second week of July to the end of August. And annoyingly, again, it's coming at the teeth of what the government decisions are going to be made at. So I think from my point of view, strategy, should I be able to get away with my family? I'm going to be very much booking late. I'm going to be very much thinking about being flexible when I do book. And I think I'm going to judge the government initiatives, the news we're getting in terms of jabs and in terms of whether we need to take PCR tests. I'm going to take that as something that could change very much right up to the point when I leave for a holiday, and I will have to be flexible about the holiday while I'm doing it afterwards.
What about you, Nick?
Well, I think, like Ben, I've got grown-up children, although I don't think we should forget the fact that many 20-year-olds are effectively unable to travel to those destinations as well, because they won't be able to get their second jab in time. And so it's not just the teenagers. I think the only way to treat this summer, if you're desperate to travel, is to make a very late decision, and that way you mitigate the risks of the country that you want to go to being closed or having its traffic light status changed, and you maximize the chance of being able to come back to the UK without having to self-isolate. So if you've got something booked, I think you need to leave it very, very late before you postpone, if you do decide to postpone, or travel if you do decide to travel. And if you want to book, then, and you're able to do it a week before, maybe, you've just got to watch the news all the time and react very late.
Yeah.
It's a far from ideal situation, but if you want to travel, that's the only way to do it. Otherwise, you're just going to have to wait.
Yeah.
You book the time off work now, get your week sorted out, get your 2 weeks sorted out, and then try and fill it. That's the weird thing. We're just not used to this as British travellers. With the way we want to deal with our world is to find a lovely holiday, book the time off, everything's solid and secure. That security really is not going to be with us this summer. We just have to accept that. Yeah. And we have to make sure that we are being nimble when we try and move on our holidays.
Yeah.
And I would just say generally...
Can I just point out that Ben has not booked his holiday?
Well,
but I think also, a lot of the questions that we've had in advance are people being anxious about whether things are going to happen in September or October, asking for predictions. And it's simply impossible for it to predict that, even as far ahead as middle of August at the moment. But we just all have to be very patient, I think, and deal with things as they happen.
Yeah, just while we're on Malta, actually, I'm going through some of the questions, and there's one about a lady, Victoria, has booked for a tour of Malta with Mercury, double jabbed. It's booked for October. I'm concerned the status will change before I go. I mean, honestly, I think being double jabbed and not being a teenager, I'm assuming you're not a teenager, it's as good a shout as you can get, really, for that status not to change. What do you reckon?
Well, and if you're
I just want to answer that while we're on the subject of Malta.
I think if you're a double jab teenager, of which there must be a few knocking around in high risk groups, that's also pretty good for going to Malta as well. It's the double jabbing, isn't it? This is going to come down to that more than almost anything else.
Yeah, although they have said they're not. I noticed about half an hour ago, they're not going to accept the NHS app. You will need your printout. Very Luddite approach, but you will need a piece of paper saying you've been double jabbed, and that apparently will be sent to you by the NHS if you request it. Right, without further ado, let's get stuck into these destinations. Let's start with Italy. Nick, think Italy, think Nick. Is there any special advice for someone driving to the UK to Italy now?
Well, as things stand, if you arrive in Italy from the UK, you have to self-isolate for 5 days. You can do that in a villa. I think you can do that under special arrangements in a hotel. But if you're driving, my advice would be to take 5 days for it. Enjoy a leisurely drive down through France. Although to enter France, you'll have to be double jabbed. So I'm assuming the reader is double jabbed. But just bear in mind that this could change at any moment. So check just before you leave what the current arrangements are. But I would take 5 days to get there, and then you should be okay. Yeah.
And is a visit to family in Italy subject to the same restrictions as holidays? Well, I can answer that one. It very definitely is. A Sicily question. One of our guests tonight is due to fly to Sicily soon to stay in a villa for 2 weeks. Is that going to be okay? We don't mind quarantining on return. Will we? Good question. Will we be covered by travel insurance?
It's high. I don't covered for cancellation. I assume the question is if they decide they want to cancel, but almost certain.
I mean, I think any cover, even while you're over there. I know I've been having the same conversation domestically.
Okay. Well, currently most travel insurance policies won't cover you for travel to an amber destination, because bizarrely the Foreign Office still advises against all but essential travel to nearly all of Europe, even though their infection rates are much lower than ours. So quite on what basis they're making that judgment, I simply don't know. But so long as that status remains, then for Italy, then your travel insurance probably won't be valid. We have got an article on what to do about that, which I hope my colleague will be sharing in the chat. So in fact, she has just done.
Good time to share that one then. And then somebody posted tonight, Natalie, postponed a holiday from last year to Verona for the opera. Oh, how amazing. Traveling by Eurostar. We're not sure whether to postpone again. I mean, that's not just the holiday, is it? It's the opera tickets.
Yeah, it's depends whether or not you'll be able to postpone the opera tickets. That's a good point. Will depend on the basis on which you bought them, or whether a tour operator arranged them for you, or the terms and conditions of the booking. But maybe you don't worry too much about sacrificing the cost of those tickets for the sake of the whole holiday.
Yeah,
it just depends when you're booking, and when you're expecting to travel, and how prepared you are to leave it late. If it's Eurostar, you can change your tickets at the very last minute at no extra cost anyway. So I as I said earlier, just be patient and make a decision as late as you can.
With all of these destinations, it's going to be about our appetite for risk as well as our ability to quarantine more than anything else. That if we are going to be travelling to amber destinations where, for example, holiday insurance may not apply, you're going to be making a judgment about whether you feel you can travel without that holiday insurance. If you're worried about whether something's going to be cancelled or whether you're not going to be able to get into a country, you're going to be making a risk decision that unfortunately we're all having to navigate this year in a way that we've never had to before.
Yeah. Ben, some advice for you here. Apparently, you can bring forward the date of your eldest vaccine. I know it won't help because you've got a 16-year-old as well, but you can bring forward that vaccination date, apparently.
Well, I have asked him to do that. The problem with 19-year-olds is that they don't necessarily do what you ask them to do. I've said, can we try and get this done a little bit earlier, son? And he vanished and went camping in Cornwall. What can I do?
Okay, so moving on now to France, another Telegraph favourite. Lots of people I know with us tonight are hoping to go to France this summer. So assuming France remains amber, what exactly do you need to take with you? We need a list here, Jen and Nick, a list. Who's going to answer that one?
You need proof of a double vaccination in order to enter France. You need a negative PCR test when you return, and then you have to self-isolate and take tests upon your return. Days
2, 5, 2 and 8, and then potentially 5 if you want to get out early. Yeah.
Early release, you can have this.
Sure. So another viewer, a guest, is going to Paris within the next few weeks. If this is possible, what must exactly the same question actually. Proof of double vaccination, negative PCR tests, and then all the rest to get back into the UK. I'm very jealous of this person. Booked on a train holiday into France and then Switzerland, followed by a river cruise from Basel to Amsterdam in August. The travel company says it's going ahead despite France requiring from the UK to quarantine and all countries being on the amber list, as well as Foreign Office advising against all but essential travel. Advice, please.
Well, I saw this question earlier. I think that the tour operator is just waiting in the hope that the status will change, because a tour operator can't operate a package to destinations that the Foreign Office advises against all but essential travel to. And in any case, Austria is going to anyway, Switzerland, Germany, and Holland, where the cruises are not allowing people arriving from Britain to, or within 10 days to enter in any case. So I think probably the tour operator is holding out for a change in policy, but eventually, if that doesn't happen, they'll be forced to offer a cancellation.
Yeah. So lots of people asking what is the likelihood of being able to actually go to France. Well, you can go to France, of course, if you are prepared to quarantine. So what the quarantine there and quarantine on the way home at the moment with France, isn't it?
Sorry, are you asking me?
I'm asking who, whichever one.
There's no quarantine requirements if you're double vaccinated currently, unless it's changed in the last hour since I started watching the football. But yeah. So
France will let you in if you're double vaccinated, or if you've got a PCR test, or do you have to have the vaccination? Lots of people are asking this.
I think it's double vaccinated for France.
It's double vaccinated, yeah.
Yeah. Okie doke. So that's planning ahead. Okay, so the US, which we just seem to take one step forward and 5 steps back in terms of reinstating that travel corridor. Somebody here tonight is supposed to be getting married in Florida in October. How lovely. But so many people desperate to get to the US, including some of us, I know that. And this week wasn't great news for that, was it?
No, I think 2 weeks ago during the G7 there was a definite sort of upsurge. The idea that Boris and Biden were gonna crack heads together, and it would have been a big political win, I think, for Britain to say that they'd managed to get some sort of travel corridor up with the US. Similarly, the US could have made a political statement and allowed travel back to the UK. And I think certainly the mood music 2 weeks ago just did feel as though the US could really be one of the early winners. But you're right. Certainly yesterday, it all seemed to change. The talks that they've been having intergovernmental talks that they've been having seem to have basically hit again the problem that Britain is experiencing at the moment with the Delta variant and the concerns that people have for that spreading. And it seems to be that which is potentially putting back the possibility of US travel. I mean, we don't have any absolute definitive arguments on this, but it does sound as though it might be that they're looking at September at the earliest now.
Yeah.
I mean, it is we get so many questions about the US because it's a huge Telegraph reader favourite, and obviously we're all as anxious as you are to be able to get people out there. The benefits of the US and Great Britain's similarities in terms of vaccination levels, I think, is quite important and may well be something that stands us in good stead going forward. But it's so boring to be saying that we don't know at the moment. I would have thought that if we were talking about a list of long-haul destinations that over the course of the next 6 months would be likely to come on track, I would have said that the US was one of those long-haul destinations that might well come back on track, simply because they're at the same sort of stage as we are with vaccinations. But if the mood music about Britain and its Delta variant, it's the Indian variant, but it's the one that we seem to be exporting into Europe at the moment. If that mood music doesn't change fairly soon, we are going to be looking like a place that people don't want to be setting up travel corridors. Having said all that, we're terribly excited about the US, and we've got some good stuff coming up over the weekend about things that you can be planning further in advance for. So do take a look at the sections.
Yeah,
it's Independence Day. Great reasons to talk about it.
So it's amazing, isn't it, how context and comparative situations change your thoughts on things. I mean, this time last year we were all groaning about the idea of testing, and compared to all the faff around double vaccination proof, PCR tests are feeling like that they weren't as bad as we thought at one stage. But they are expensive, aren't they? And we had a question here about somebody who wants to book a honeymoon in mid-August, and what the likely cost of a week in Croatia with cost of tests included for double vaccinated travellers would be. So again, I mean, that's probably subject to our advice about kind of leave it as late as possible, really, isn't it?
It's tricky with honeymoons, isn't it? You want to make this one of the big holiday in your life you want to be absolutely certain of. But I think Nick's advice that you should leave decisions like that till as late as possible, it really, really holds fire with something that matters that much.
Yeah.
Give it wait until 2 weeks.
And tests, I mean, on your return to the UK could cost about £80 each, but they could cost a lot more, couldn't they, if you don't do your research? I mean,
yeah, you definitely want to do a little bit of shopping around, because there are some very high prices. I mean, I've seen prices up to 120, 150 £50, but you can get it much cheaper than that. But it's definitely worth. We're sharing a link, I think, with some information on how to shop for those.
Brilliant feature. I keep sharing that with all my friends who are trying to get back here or go somewhere.
The odd thing is that some of the government mandated ones are very expensive as well. You sort of feel there should be a kite mark that brings price into the consideration for British taxpayers.
By the way, I've just double checked on the French travel advice, and you actually aren't allowed to travel to France unless you're double vaccinated, unless you can provide evidence of a essential purpose behind your trip. So it's quite strict, and even then, when you do, you have to self-isolate for 7 days. So it's effectively only open to the double
quarantine. So currently France is not really an option for your average holiday maker, is it?
Well, yeah, I mean, unless if they're double vaccinated, it's a very good bet.
Didn't you say they need an essential reason to travel?
No. If you need if you're not double vaccinated. So
right. Okay.
At the moment, despite Macron being quite negative about, a unified European position on entry from Britain, they've actually got some of the more reasonable rules at the moment.
So talking of reasonable rules, Australia, not so reasonable.
There's another absolute gem of a Telegraph travel reader destination.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose the one thing we can say about Australia is that they've been fairly hard and fast about what they're saying. They have not changed their stance pretty much from the beginning of the outbreak of COVID-19. They have shut their borders, and the expectation is not that the expectation is that British travellers are unlikely to be able to travel there until 2022. That's caused huge ructions for families that are split up. It's caused huge difficulties for people who wanted to go out and see one of the most exciting and interesting destinations in the world. But it does not look as though the mood music is going to change, especially if you look at the way that Australia reacts when they do have limited COVID outbreaks, as it has been in Sydney and in Melbourne recently. They do very serious local lockdowns. They don't last very long, but they really go very, very hard on it. And they're clearly at a point where they want to. They're actually on individual cases. That's what they care about. They're also very under-vaccinated compared to where we are. So I really don't think it's, well, I mean, again, we don't know, but the mood music does seem to be that we're unlikely to be able to travel there until 2022, unfortunately, because what a place to be going to, and especially during the winter months, it'll be a lovely escape for lots of people.
So another Telegraph summer classic, Greece. What are the chances, a specific question about Greece, what's the chance Kefalonia might make the green list, as the UK government seems to be concentrating on Corfu, Zakynthos, Kos and Rhodes?
Okay, well, this is an example of this really bizarre situation that we have at the moment, where the Department for Transport is setting the traffic light arrangements, which tells you whether or not you have to self-isolate when you return, or you can go into full hotel quarantine when you return from different directions. And the Foreign Office, the FCDO, is adjusting its advice for whether or not it feels that it's safe for British people to travel to certain destinations. And for most amber destinations, it's saying that it advises against all but essential travel. And as we've just mentioned, that means that it's very hard to get travel insurance. But for 5 Greek islands, Corfu, Zakynthos, Crete, Rhodes, and Kos, it isn't advising against all but essential travel. And those 5 islands have had that status ever since travel was reopened on May the 17th, and there's been no adjustment to it at all. And it's a completely bizarre situation as far as I can see. You could be having a holiday on Rhodes, and you could take a day trip to a tiny local island with hardly any population and with very little COVID, which has been the whole population has been fully vaccinated, and according to the Foreign Office, you'd be going somewhere which they didn't advise you to travel to. So it's a really bizarre situation in Greece. The question about whether Kefalonia might be added to that list of destinations which the Foreign Office considers safe, I think there's a pretty good chance, but I simply don't understand how they're making these decisions, and it's something we're going to, I think, try and put a little bit more pressure on the Foreign Office to explain in the next few days.
So there are lots of questions about Greece. Just to back up what Nick said there. I mean, we are really trying to press for answers in these very kind of opaque situations.
I mean, let me give you another example of the really bizarre situation between the Department for Transport and the FCO. So for the whole time that we've been able to travel since May 17th, the Canary Islands has been on the Foreign Office's own kind of green list, in that they don't advise against travel, but the Balearics, they've advised against travel too. And then the Department for Transport makes the Balearics green, and the FCDO suddenly changes its advice so that it's okay to travel there. It's a totally incomprehensible situation, but the Department for Transport doesn't make the Canaries green. They're running 2 parallel systems, which are having a fundamental effect on people's ability to go on holiday, and it doesn't make sense.
I think one of the only thing that we can see fairly clearly this year, which we didn't necessarily see last year, is the fact that they are committed, in whatever way any of the government departments are committed, they are committed to making sure that islands are treated slightly differently from the mainlands to which they are attached. So we're seeing that with Greece. The advice changes when you go from mainland to those 5 destinations, and also we're assuming that will expand as well. And we have seen that with the Balearics and mainland Spain, and hopefully the Canaries as well.
Yeah. Simon asked about the Greek PM has so far not bowed to pressure from the EU to require Brits who haven't been double vaccinated quarantine. Do we think he'll hold this line into the rest of the summer? Well, I mean, that's really impossible to call, but the Greeks...
Not if Merkel has anything to do with it.
No, but I mean, Greece has been very outspoken about wanting to, and has stood by its word as far as possible, hasn't it? I mean, it's been fairly open that it wants the Brits back, and
there's an economic dynamic for Greece, Portugal, Spain. They all want British tourists back because their economies rely on us going and roasting ourselves on sun lounges as much as possible, whereas Germany relies on that far less. France is an amazing domestic market of tourists that will be able to sop up an awful lot of the lack of British people that are being unable to travel if they're not double jabbed. It's interesting watching how Europe is behaving in terms of how this works out. It's where the classic dynamic between nation states and the EU itself asserts itself almost most profoundly. It's a fascinating show.
Just some more on tests. Obviously, this really is a hot topic, and this is an interesting question. So somebody has asked, if they travel to France and have to prepay for their return tests, what happens if I stay out there long enough and the rules change for their return and they're no longer required? Do they get a refund? I think, Nick, that's
I mean, someone else, Michael Houghton, has just asked on the chat here. He booked a pre-departure test for a COVID-19 test on day 2 and day 8, and for his forthcoming holiday, and now that's been cancelled. And the COVID testing companies say they won't refund, only issue a voucher to use within a year. Is this reasonable? Frankly, I don't think it's at all reasonable. And I don't know. We haven't looked into what the terms and conditions for all these COVID tests are with different companies, but I think it's definitely something worth checking. What happens if you don't travel or the rules change? All you've done is booked a test. They don't have to actually they don't have to execute the test.
No outlay for them.
Yeah, so I don't see why you shouldn't get. You might get a small charge for the admin, but I can't really see why you shouldn't get a refund if you're not going to use the test and they haven't been done. But this is a new thing which is arising now. More and more people are traveling, and the status of different destinations is changing so fast. So that's definitely something I think we should look into.
And can you book tests while you're abroad so that you don't get into this situation in the first place? I mean, all power to those people who are organised enough to do that before they leave. But I'm
sure you can. I'm sure you can do it online. You have to show evidence to the UK authorities when you return to the UK that you've done that. So as long as you can do that, then I'm sure
tour operators help with that sort of thing as well. So if you're they will have they've got far enough ahead with this sort of stuff to make sure that those PCR tests are in place at the right time, which is also the issue. It's not just a random time while you're away. There's a recognised time before you travel back when you've got to have it.
Yeah. And currently there's lots of questions about what kind of test. Currently it's PCR tests. It's not lateral flows. It's just PCR tests are accepted. So we have got lots of information in that same feature about testing. Some tried and tested testing companies, not just the government advised ones. So if you're traveling with a tour operator, or if you have a package holiday, and the UK requires a negative PCR test, who pays? Now that is a good question, and I think it depends on the tour operator, doesn't it? Some of them do include.
TUI has brought in packages for the way, but there's still a cost attached. You have to pay whatever. I mean, you're down for the test. Although TUI, for example, are already very cheap ones for you to.
Yeah,
I don't think many tour operators are actually paying for them. I think you'll find, generally speaking, tour operators are a little bit short of cash at the moment, and it's not. It's quite unlikely that they're going to be able to sustain, be able to bear those costs. So I'm afraid, although as Ben says, many of them have arranged cheap deals, they're not going to pay for them.
Yeah. Some questions on packages and postponements. I mean, this has been such a hot topic, hasn't it, ever since the start of the pandemic, some 18 months ago. Somebody's due to fly to Lanzarote in September on a package holiday. Should they pay the balance due on the 4th of July, early next week?
This is a trademark Nick Trend question.
It is, isn't it? Oh, Nick.
Yes. Well, I mean, I can really sympathise with people on this one, because it's a really difficult decision to make, because if you don't pay the balance, you're effectively breaking your contract, and you're cancelling your holiday, and you risk you will lose that balance, which might be 10% of the cost of your holiday, £200 or £300, perhaps even more for a 2-week family holiday to Lanzarote. But I have spoken to a few tour operators about this, and what many of the bigger, better ones say is that if you want to postpone your departure to a later date, say next year, they will allow you to postpone the date that the final balance is due as well. So you're carrying over your deposit to a future booking. So that's the safest way of making sure you don't lose your deposit. The alternative is to pay the full balance, and then you're either in a situation where you may have to postpone the whole holiday having paid for it, or that you may get a refund if the holiday is cancelled. So it's one of those really tricky decisions. But personally, for £200 or £300, I would probably ask to postpone the departure to next year and the balance due date as well. That's probably the safest way around it for most people. Does that make sense? It's a really tricky situation for many people, and those balances have become due over the last 3, 4, 5 weeks for the summer peak. So it's been affecting a lot of people.
Yeah. And what about if you're attempting to travel independently, if you've booked your accommodation separately to your flights? Who were due to go to Namibia, or who were due to go in November last year. Deposits were paid, agreed to hold over for a year, and they're looking to claim back their deposits.
Yeah, I saw this question. They've it's not entirely clear how they've booked their holiday, but they've had a refund from the airline, a full refund. So I'm assuming that they've booked the accommodation separately. The accommodation provider, whether it's the hotel directly or whether it's an agent, an online net booking agent perhaps, has agreed to hold over the hotel booking from last year. Whether I don't know what the contractual situation there is. It may be that the agent or the hotel was just acting reasonably and trying to help our reader out, or it may be that was the contractual position that they were allowed to postpone. It will depend entirely on how you made the booking and how reasonable the agent or the hotel wishes to be. But you're in quite a tricky legal position, because especially if it's an overseas hotel, because you have made a contract to stay there, and if it's you that changes that contract, then you're liable for the cost. So I think the best bet in that situation is probably to ask for a further postponement and hope that the hotel is in agreement.
There's another question along those lines on the chat at the moment from Carolyn Yeoman, who's due to go on a river cruise to Portugal in October and paid a £500 deposit. If we cancel, will we lose our deposit? She's saying, and the answer is, I think yes. If you cancel, you will lose a deposit. To Nick's point, if you change the contract by deciding you're not going to pay any more money to anyone, then you will lose the deposit. But speak to your operator and see what happens as time goes on, and as you get nearer to the date. The circumstances and rules around the river cruise may change, and the operator may then cancel the cruise itself, and at that point you would be entitled to a refund.
So some questions about the UK quarantine rules, actually. So inbound passengers. Linda's partner wants to visit her. Wants to come visit me in Toronto. Oh, sorry. So Linda must be in Toronto. Will he need to quarantine when he arrives or when he returns? He has NHS proof of being double vaccinated. I thought it was somebody coming from Toronto. So
well, you can't visit Canada as a tourist at the moment. So if the reader is a tourist, they won't be allowed in. If you're a Canadian citizen, then it's a different set of rules. But I think that it does involve quarantine. But you can't go on holiday to Canada now.
Yeah. So I've got quite a lot of cruise questions, which I'll come to in a moment. But just back on quarantine, we booked a flight to Greece, the island of Crete via Athens. Change of flights at Athens airport. If only Crete islands are made green in August, but not the mainland, can we avoid quarantine rules or have to quarantine as technically we fly via Athens? Well, you touched on that earlier, didn't you, Nick? In terms of if you go anywhere where you're being asked to quarantine, anywhere that's amber list, you will have to quarantine on return.
Yeah, if you land in Athens and Athens is amber and you fly to Crete and Crete is green, when you return to the UK, you have to declare that you were on the Greek mainland, in which case you'd have to self-isolate.
If you're in Crete for 2 weeks and then flew directly back from Crete to the UK, you'd be all right.
Yeah, you've got a lawyer's mind, haven't you, Ben? I mean, most people wouldn't do that. They would have the same return route as they booked on their holiday. But I suppose theoretically speaking, you're right. What I can't remember, I'm afraid, is whether or not, if it was just a stopover and you stayed on the same plane, I can't remember. But whether or not that counts. But if you disembark, then you have touched the Greek mainland, so you are. But in any case, if you change a flight in Athens, you'll be having to disembark whatever, because you don't have that kind of temporary hopping type flight where you stop in Athens and take off straight away for Crete. You'd have to change planes.
So on the lawyer tip, if you're abroad and your destination is put on the UK red list, can you return via another country without having to do the quarantine hotel?
Well, it seems that you can, but you'd have to spend 10 or 14 days in that amber listed destination, and you'd have to show all the correct test results. Quite a few people did that. I think when people who were trying to return to India when it was put onto the red list, they stopped over in Turkey, for example, and it's obviously a much more pleasant way of spending your quarantine than having to spend it in a hotel in Heathrow for 10 days. Yeah.
So on to some cruise questions, and I'm going to go through the list here. So we're booked on Cunard QN2 later this year to New York City and need to travel onwards into Canada to stay with family for Christmas. What are your views on whether or not the US-Canada border will be open? Well, I think we've kind of covered that, haven't we? We just don't know.
We would love it to be, but we don't know.
Yeah, most importantly, we want to avoid flying. I want to use New York City to Canada Amtrak. Adirondack train to Montreal, but it's not currently running. I mean, we unfortunately just have no insight into that other than what we've already gone through. And there was some cruise questions down here. I'm booked with Viking to Iceland in September, but the Foreign Office is still advising against international cruises, so I can't get insurance. Is the FCDO advice likely to change, and where does that leave passengers who've booked?
You're absolutely right that you can't take cruises outside British inland waters at the moment, and I think we're all waiting for a moment where there's a sort of wake-up call from the government that they need to actually take a look at the cruise industry and take a look at themselves in terms of going further afield for British travellers. We can't second guess what our government is going to do about cruises, but you would expect a gradual alignment of cruise destinations as things. I mean, double jabbing will be another big issue for people. It will be interesting to see if they start to define whether you can take a cruise from Britain if you're double jabbed, as opposed to just saying no cruises if you sort of, which seems to be the default position at the moment. I don't think I would like to think that by September we will be able to cruise again, but I don't think Nick or I or Claire have any firm advice on that.
No. So same would go for a Danube cruise from Vienna to the Black Sea in September. And yeah.
I mean, can I just say you can get insurance for travelling to destinations or on cruises that the Foreign Office advises against, but only very specific policies, which again we have got some advice on that in the articles which we've shared on the chat. So it is possible to find insurance, but most policies won't cover you.
Yeah. And there was another cruise one, I'm pretty sure. If I come to that, we can dip back to it. Oh, yeah, sorry. River cruise in Portugal for November the 22nd, ending in a short break to Porto. We're double vaccinated again. Same applies, I think, for that one.
Sounds lovely.
Yeah, it does sound really.
I want to hang out in Porto in November, please, and have a cruise.
We're booked to the Maldives in November, where I was staying on an island with 44 villas, flying direct. What do you think of the chances of going? Well, I was in the Maldives when at the end of last year, just before the tiers were implemented, and I have to say they had really nailed sort of pandemic travel in terms of isolating islands and really making it work very slickly. But I guess it's on the red list because of its numbers, so we've got no way of knowing how they're going to reduce those. So there. Oh, blimey, we're nearly running out of time. So I have to say, reading through this chat, you are all very well versed on this. And there's quite a few people there I think we should pull in for our next webinar.
I think the person
really
I want to
reader advice going on.
And also a big shout out to Ravindra Joshi, who was the first person on the day, who was saying hello from Wembley, which I think is pretty cool today. I hope you heard the roar.
Yes.
Were you really, Ravindra, if you're still there, were you really at Wembley, or was that just a nod to the news of the moment?
I like to think Ravindra was there.
Say hi.
Well, so do I. I don't know whether he's pulling our legs or not.
Anyway, sadly, that brings us to the end of this webinar. I really hope that has been useful. I mean, it's literally changing. As we've been sat here, the advice on Portugal's changed. They're now saying that that teenagers can go in as long as they're with double vaccinated adults. So, it really is minute by minute seat of pants changes. So I just hope we've been able to give you some valid insight there. And on what is really a very, very stressful subject if you've got a holiday booked, and indeed if you want to go away. So thank you all so much for joining us and on this auspicious evening for international sport as well. Thank you, Ben and Nick, for your sage advice as ever, your lawyers' outlooks, and you're on being so on the pulse, and I really hope you'll join us again in at some point in the future this year, when we'll hopefully have some more concrete advice and some of those trips that you have asked us about tonight actually manage to take place and you can go. But thanks ever so much, and enjoy the rest of your evenings.
Thank you. Good night.